If you've ever opened a table in Power Query and seen dozens of columns with hard-coded name references throughout, as soon as those column names change, then you've probably seen your query fall apart. Manually referring to columns in your queries makes them tedious and error-prone. In this video, I'm going to show you some quick, practical ways that we can dynamically reference columns in your Power Query so that your transformations automatically adapt to any changes in column names. Let's have a look at some examples. First step is we need to get this sample data into Power Query so that we can begin modeling. To do that, I've made this a table. You can see if I click on the data here, we can see the table design ribbon, and we can see the name of the table is t_data. If your data wasn't in a table, I'm just going to convert this back to a range. We can click anywhere in the data, press Ctrl and T. This will bring up the Create Table dialog. Then we can click OK. I'm going to call this tData again. I'm just going to remove the highlighting that got left over from that old table, and I'm going to change the design up here to be this. Just going to take off the filters using the filter button tick box. So now we're going to go up to the data ribbon and we're going to go from table and range. This will allow us to pull the data into Power Query. Now we can see the table has been loaded. We can see the query on the left hand side here, and at the moment we just have two steps. I'm just going to delete this automatically generated change type step because we don't need that at the moment. So we've just got our source, which is our t_data table from the workbook. So scenario number one we're going to look at is how we can delete columns without hard coding the column name. And we're just going to have a look at that in action. I'm going to pretend with this sample data set we don't want the players column. So we could right click on it and we could go to remove. That's going to remove the column. You can see we've got the remove column applied step here. However, if we look up in the formula bar, the table.remove columns function has passed in our source table, and then it's used a list of column names which have been hard coded, and you can see players has been typed in double quotes and within the curly brackets. So we've got a hard coded list there being fed in. Problem with that is if we click close and load to, I'm just going to load this as a data connection for now, as we don't actually need to visualize the outputs for this. We're just working within the Power Query editor. Then I'm going to go to here and I'm going to change players to be player. Then we're going to open up the Power Query editor using the keyboard shortcut Alt and F12. Now when we go to our query, you can see it's telling us the column players of the table wasn't found, and that's because we've changed that column name to be player. So if we were to type player in here, the query reworks. However, we've still got that problem of having a hard-coded column name. So let's have a look at the first way we can remove this. One simple way we could go about this is if that column, player or players, is always in position 2 in the table of columns, we could just use indexing to refer to that second column. So let's have a look at how we could do that. I'm just going to click on the FX button to add a step in. We're going to click insert. So we've got a new step here. I'm going to change that from custom and we're going to call it column names pos2. We're going to use the table.columnNames function, and if I use the arrow keys down to that, and then if we just press Control and space, we can see that this returns the column names as a list. So we can get all those column names from the table as a list. So I'm going to open parenthesis. We're going to pass in our source step as a table, and then we can press enter. So now we've got a list of all those column names. You can see now they're going vertically. 5 column names, team, player, goals, Jan, Feb and March. If we go back to our source step, that's our team, player, goals, Jan, Feb and March columns. So we've got a nice vertical stack of those and in list format. So now I hope you've checked out my other video where we looked at Power Query structure for tables, lists and records. If you haven't, I'll link it in the cards above. We're going to use a technique that I've illustrated in there where we can work our way vertically down a list. And the way we can do that is using indexing and putting a number within the curly brackets. So Power Query zero-based indexing, which means if we put 0, we'd get position number 1 for team. Now we want to get rid of the player column. So that's in position number 2, which means it would be index 1. If we press enter on that, you can see now we've got the results of that specific list item that was in index position 1 within that list. So that's how we can always target the name of whatever's contained in that column. Now you can see that's called that step navigation. However, we did name it earlier col position. So I'm just going to go up to view, and then we're going to go to the advanced editor, and we're going to have a look at the source M code because it'll be a little bit easier to refer to. So we've got col names pos2. Our next step was what we generated with the interface where we did table.remove columns. Now you can see here we got the player hard-coded as a nested list. So what if we just delete that, and instead we're going to refer to the output of our column names pos2 step. If you remember when we drilled into it, showed player, and here the table we're going to feed into to remove our data from needs to be our source step that contains all of the columns. So we'll feed in our source step, and we're going to tell it to look for the players column, and then it's going to feed that back into the remove columns argument. Now if we click done, I'm just going to tidy up this so we've got some nice camel case without the hash and speech marks. Note whenever you're in Power Query, if you have special characters like spaces, the syntax changes, it makes it a little bit more messy. So it's always cleaner to make sure you don't have spaces. You can use underscores or just use camel case where you've got capitalization at the beginning of each word. I'm going to click done on that. Now if we go down to our last step, you can see the players column has gone. However, the reference is to the output of our intermediary step beforehand, which was this navigation step, which outputted player, and that was nothing more than an index of the original source table for the second column. So now let's test that. If we go close and load 2, now this time we're going to change this column back to players. And let's go back into the query editor, Alt and F12. And you can see now our workbook is still working correctly. If we go to the navigation step, we've got players instead of player because it's simply pulling the dynamic name of that column and allowing us to remove it. So that's a nice, simple, quick way. If you know a column is always in the same position, just use indexing to remove it. For our next technique, I'm just going to duplicate this step, and I'm going to rename the first one col pos. I'll rename this second one to be col filter. For this technique, we're going to use table filtering. Let's imagine with this source data, we want to remove any column that has the word goals within the column name. So in this example, we were looking to get rid of goals Jan, goals Feb, and goals March columns. So to do that, I want to somehow apply a filter just looking for the word goals to these column names. So to start doing that, we're going to go to the FX button. We're going to name this step col names list. And then we're going to use the table.columnNames function again. So I'm going to press tab, and we're going to start typing source, tab, and then we can press enter. So we've got our list of column names like we did in the first scenario. Now we need a way of filtering this list. So one simple method we can use is convert this list into a table. Once it's a table, you know you can apply the filters using the UI. So to get this back to a table, we could use a new step and we could call it col names table. And then there's a function called table.fromList tab. And then we'll feed in our col names list. Press tab. So we've got that list from our second step now as a table. And you can see as soon as that's a table, we've now got the filter button. So I'm just going to use the interface for this step. Click on the filter, and then we're going to say text filters does not contain. We can put the word goals in there. So if we click OK, we've now got the two columns we're looking to keep. I'm going to call this step filtered out goals. Now, what we could use from this source step is we could use the table.select columns function, which will allow us to pick what columns from this table we want. So we're going to click on the FX button. We're going to go table.select columns. If we press Control and space on that, you'll see this returns a table with only the specified columns. So our table for that is going to be our source step, because that contains all of our columns. Then you can see it's asking for columns as any. So let's feed in our filtered out goals output. So if we go filtered out goals, press tab, then add that. You can see here we've got an error, so it's telling us we cannot convert a value of type table to type text. So it's telling us what we're feeding in to this function, table.select rows, is not in the right format. So our filtered out goals was in a table format. What we actually need is this in a list format. To get this into a list, we could use a function called table to list. So I've added a step in here. We're going to rename this filtered out goals list. And then this is going to use table.toList. You can see this converts a table into a list by applying the specified combining function to each row of values in the table. Press tab on that, and open our parenthesis. We're going to feed in that tabular output from the previous step. We've now got the two column names in list format. Now when we go down to our final step, which I didn't rename, so we'll call that now output, instead of using filtered out goals, which was table output that caused us the error, it's now changed it automatically to be the list, as that was the last step, and that works. So we've managed to go from this 5-column table with columns beginning with goals, and we've got a nice clean output referring to no column headers, that simply has the 2 columns that we wanted to keep. Now I've built that method up visually using 5 steps along the way here, but actually what we could do is shortcut that and not have so many steps. So I'm just going to duplicate this, and I'm going to rename it, and we're going to call it column filter 2. Now where we got our list of columns in the second step, actually there's a function called List.Select. So I'm going to add a step in here, and I'm going to call this col names to keep list, and we're going to use the List.Select. Now you can see this asks for a list as lists, so we can feed in that last step, col names lists, and then it's asking for a selection as a function. So let's feed in col names list, press tab, and now our selection method, we're going to use each so that we can cycle through every row in that column names list, and we can say each not, and then we can use text dot contains. You can see text dot contains returns whether the text contains a substring. We're going to look for goals using this. Open our parenthesis, and then our text is going to be the output of the each cycling through our columns names list. To do that, we're going to use the underscore. Then we're going to press comma, and our substring argument is going to be goals within double quotes because it's hard-coded text. And then we're going to press enter. So now you can see we've fed in our list from this step, and we've said with that list of 5 columns, cycle through each row and find where not So does not equal, that's similar to in Excel where you'd see this, is not any row where text contains the word goals. So what we've got here is we've got a list output of the two columns. Now remember what our output actually required. It required a list of the two columns to keep. So we're going to change this from that, and we're going to put col names to keep list instead. That's going to keep our query working, and actually we can get rid of this step, we can get rid of this step, and we can get rid of that step. So now you can see we've gone straight from our source, checked our column names list, decided which of those to keep, and then used the table.select columns to finalize the output. A nice, quick, short process, meaning any column that ever has the word goals in it will disappear from our output table. And that's it, some practical examples on how to dynamically reference columns within Power Query. Using these will make your queries more flexible, faster to update, and far less error prone. Make sure you join us again next week. Hit the subscribe button so you get the notifications. Give this video a thumbs up if you find it useful, and I'll see you in the next one. Thanks for watching.